Right now, inside of this car, there is a problem. The two people inside have gotten together under very shady circumstances. One of them is an incredible singing star who loves to floss his riches arrogantly in front of others, and the other one has a rather intriguing secret about themselves that they're keeping from the driver, and they're both heading home to indulge in some sinful proclivities. But the problem that the driver is just now realizing is that the brakes are not working. As the car begins to speed and swerve, the driver cannot maintain control of the vehicle. They're only going faster and faster, zooming in and out of traffic, trying to avoid hitting others, until they finally swerve down an embankment and violently ram into a tree. As bad as this crash is, the two inside survive. The passenger, although banged up and bruised, is able to walk out almost unscathed. But the driver can't move, and he'll never be able to walk again. And while he lays there in agony, waiting for help to come, he realizes that this was no accident. Someone or a group of someones did this to him. For his deviant quest for stardom, could this have been his karma for the crime the others believe he was a part of to achieve that fame? Sometimes the saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, pride begets the fall, and you reap what you sow, could never be more true. Sometimes when one is in search of becoming an important figure, they are willing to do anything and everything to get there. If you couple that with arrogance, mixed with the lap of luxury and seemingly endless amounts of money, one can do some heinous things to get to and stay on the top. But as many believe in a little thing called karma, and shows that maybe it's not worth it to do such things in a bid to become a star. And after hearing this story, you may ask yourself if karma was actually involved. On March 26, 1950, in Kingstree, South Carolina, Theodore Doris Pendergrass, aka Teddy Pendergrass, was born to Jesse and Ida Geraldine Pendergrass. The two had met while in South Carolina and had gotten hitched in 1936, but they weren't to stay together long. Jesse had been drafted to war in 1940 to 1947. When he returned, their relationship was still tumultuous and marred with great losses. Ida had the misfortune of suffering 6 miscarriages. Her desire for her marriage to work as well as to successfully conceive led Ida, who was already religious, to dive deeper into her religion. She prayed constantly and even made a pact with the Lord that if he'd bless her with at least just one child, she'd dedicate her life completely to him. It seems her God had made good on their pact, because in 1949, Ida became pregnant and was able to hold on to this pregnancy. But unfortunately, she wasn't able to hold on to Jesse. While Ida was pregnant, Jesse had left her for another woman. Could it have been a trauma response from all the other miscarriages his wife had suffered? Only he knows, but Jesse's absence made Ida grow even closer to her God. And after finally giving birth, she did as she said she would. She dedicated not only her life to the Lord, but her healthy baby boy, Teddy, as well. He was their only child. Ida was diligent in raising Teddy in church, and the child took to the love of Christ well. He was just as much into the Lord as his mother. So much that at the age of 10, Teddy felt his calling was in ministry, and the church ordained him a minister. They even allowed him to preach to the congregation. Church was also the place where Teddy developed his love of music. This is where he'd sing solos and played the drums for the choir. This was his musical training ground. Although his mother kept him as busy as possible and even spoiled him with great gifts and things that seemed luxurious at the time, like ice skating, Teddy was longing for something more, something he felt was missing. A father. He'd never gotten a chance to see or be with his dad, and that was hurtful to him. Seeing her child anguish in this, Ida made a promise to find Teddy's father for him. And when he turned 11 years old, she did just that. Ida had found Jesse and introduced him to his son. Teddy was excited about this. Finally seeing his father and being able to have some kind of relationship with him brought him joy, but it didn't last long because tragedy struck. On June 13, 1962, Jesse had gotten into an altercation with a man he'd sometimes drink with. This altercation led to Jesse being stabbed to death at only 47 years old. This devastated Teddy. He'd finally gotten a chance to fill that empty hole in his heart, and now it was ripped away from him and empty again. This situation would plague him for the rest of his life. Things would continue to get shaky with Teddy. At the age of 13, he'd hooked up with some guys around the way, and he fell into a bad crowd. Ida and Teddy had moved to a very impoverished part of Philadelphia, where gang activity and crime was high. One day, he witnessed 2 black gang members robbing a store, and when the police came, Teddy was somehow blamed for it. As the police were arresting him, people were shouting how they had the wrong kid, but this stopped nothing. And even in court, although it was proven that Teddy was not the one who committed the crime, he was still sentenced to 4 months in a juvenile delinquent facility. While he was incarcerated, he tried to keep from being bullied by indulging in what was considered cool activities like smoking and gambling cards. After getting released, Teddy, who was once an incredible student, started to slip academically. He started to skip school with friends and frequent parties where he'd drink and heavily pursue girls. He completely failed in school, and when he found out he wasn't graduating his 11th grade year, he dropped out of school. This hurt his mother terribly. But regardless, Teddy went out and did odd jobs to survive. One thing that never wavered was his love and pursuit of music. While he worked the odd jobs, he still did side gigs playing drums in local clubs. During the process, Teddy was discovered by a talent agent, and he ended up recording a song called Angel with Muddy Feet. This single was a complete flop and was a huge disappointment for Teddy's first venture into having a music career. But soon things would start to look up for young Teddy P. When he was 18 years old, Teddy had played drums and toured with a number of local groups and bands, which helped get him experience, but also his name out there. He had joined a group called the Cadillacs. When singer Harold Melvin from Harold and the Blue Notes spotted him. Recognizing Teddy's talent, Harold hired Teddy as a drummer, but soon his involvement would change the direction of his career. While he was with the Blue Notes, Teddy learned how to not only hone in on his drumming skills, but how to get through the seedy entertainment business as well. Harold had taken him under his wing and taught him how to navigate. And as much of a mentor Harold was to Teddy, Teddy would prove to be an essential asset to this group. The Blue Notes, although known, weren't huge stars just yet. They could only play small venues, and the money was kind of scarce. Due to the group's lack of funds, it was to the point where eating wasn't always possible, and finding hotel stay was hard. Teddy had to rely on his mother for financial aid a lot of the time, and though Teddy was the drummer, he thought his singing dreams would never be realized until one fateful day at rehearsal would change that. During a rehearsal while Teddy was on drums, he began randomly singing to himself, but it was loud enough that some of the group members heard it and was highly impressed. This led to Harold adding him to the singing lineup and having him share lead vocals with Harold. The group's recognition started to improve, but the money, however, didn't. In 1972, during a performance in New Jersey, the legendary writing duo Gamble and Huff of Philadelphia International Records spotted the group and wanted to work with them. This would help propel the group to true stardom. Seeing the potential success they were about to have, Harold began doing some shady things. To show who's boss, he changed the group name from the Blue Notes to Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. And Harold being clearly jealous, this was also his way of sticking it to Teddy. who was now the fan favorite. In the summer of 1972, the group released the hit I Miss You, and following that was the song that catapulted them to mainstream R&B superstars, If You Don't Know Me By Now, which hit the top of the charts. This sudden boom of success had now afforded Teddy the luxurious life that he'd always dreamed of. He was finally able to rent a luxury apartment, and to be a show-off, he got himself a gold Cadillac Coupe de Ville. His popularity also, of course, brought on the women, in which he became very fruitful and multiplied quickly in 1974, having made 3 children all in the same year. But as much fun he was having on the side, on the inside of the group, Teddy was very unhappy. He felt he was being used for his great talent and appeal and wasn't being properly compensated. He was also very angry because Harold, who barely contributed to anything, had complete control over the group's finances. He was the one making all the money and all the decisions. On top of that, there was a lot of confusion concerning the group name. While Teddy was the face of the group, they kept confusing him for being Harold Melvin, whose namesake was at the forefront. No one even knew Teddy's name at all, only his face. Teddy complained about the mistreatment and unfairness, as well as the name confusion, and he asked Harold if the group could at least be called Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes featuring Teddy Pendergrass. Harold wasn't trying to budge on anything, really. Whenever Teddy would confront Harold about this, Harold would become extremely hostile to the point of wanting to fight, and even threatened Teddy multiple times for even questioning him about anything. Teddy then threatened to leave and go solo, and this really upset Harold. Upset him so much to the point of threatening to have Teddy murdered if he even thought about going anywhere. And the scary part is that Harold could do that because he had ties to the Black Mob of Philadelphia, and they had no issues with taking someone off the face of the planet. So for now, Teddy stayed put. Even with all this inner turmoil, the group only continued to become more sought after. They released 2 more successful albums that brought in more acclaim as well as more money, most of which the group members, besides Harold, didn't see. Harold was completely exploiting them. He was hogging all the money and making very terrible decisions on the group's behalf, which caused them to lose money that the other members were already struggling to get. Harold made sure he was always decked out in the best of everything, including clothes and hotels. He'd be staying in a luxurious hotel, while his group members had to stay in something janky and low rent. The group members begged Teddy to confront Harold about his mistreatment of them and their money woes. When Teddy went looking for Harold, he found him partying carefree with a bunch of other rich friends, doing drugs and having a great time with their money. Teddy was pissed. When Harold saw how angry he was, he tried to calm him down by saying he had something for him. He quickly went to his beautiful hotel suite, with Teddy following. Teddy watched as Harold went to his bed and picked up a couple $100s from his bed that had stacks of what looked like thousands and thousands of dollars. This was the last straw. Teddy was tired of the disrespect, and he vowed to leave Harold's shady ways and go solo. After Teddy's departure, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes' popularity quickly declined. They were no longer successful without their main star, so other members left Harold and went with Teddy. During this time of Teddy trying to get his solo career off the ground, he had fallen into financial difficulties due to Harold's mismanagement of his funds. And on top of that, Harold promised to make good on his threats to harm Teddy physically. But regardless, Teddy continued to strive ahead. Teddy was in need of management and fast. He also needed a place to live, and he was going to use his bit of clout to obtain that through women. He used his charm, good looks, as well as his popularity to go through multiple women until he finally met the one who'd actually be able to get him the help he needed. Her name was TaazMayia Lang. Tez, for short, was a beautiful young celebrity socialite that was very popular in social circles in Philadelphia. She'd once been married to Philadelphia Eagles football player Izzy Lang, which also helped with her status. She had great connections with very important people. Tez was a smart, rich, and successful businesswoman herself, too. She owned successful hair salons that had celebrities such as Patti LaBelle, Dionne Warwick, and Nancy Wilson for clients. So seeing how great and valuable she was, Teddy worked his charm on her and eventually won her over. The two became a couple, and Teddy ended up moving in with her. The two were happy together for a while, and Teddy finally asked her to do something for him. The very reason he'd pursued her in the first place was to ask her to manage him. Tez was very hesitant to do this. Mixing business with pleasure is never really a good idea, and soon you're about to see why. It was already bad enough that Teddy was already living off of his woman because he didn't have any money of his own, but asking her to manage him was also quite emasculating. To make it worse, Teddy asked Tez for $15,000 so that he could start his own production company called Teddy Bear Productions. Tez really didn't want to do this. She was already taking care of him. He had no job, so he had no real way to pay her back. She didn't like where this was going, so Teddy made a bargain with her. He made the proposition stating that if Tez gave him the money, then he'd give her 10% of his royalties for his first solo album. Taz, who was a shrewd businesswoman, thought it over and decided to take him up on that offer. She fronted him the money, and Teddy got to work immediately working on his debut album. Unfortunately for the couple, they did break up only 2 months later, but Tez continued to work as his business manager. She got him a lot of great deals too. She even got him a solo deal with Gamble and Huff. But Teddy found out something that put a complete strain on their business relationship. One day, while Teddy was looking over his contract, he noticed something that made his jaw drop. The agreement that he thought he made with Tez wasn't what he'd agreed to at all. His bargain that he thought she agreed to was that she'd get 10% royalties from only his first album. That's it. But when he read the contract, Tez had made it that she'd get 10% of every future album, every show, merchandise, and all future business ventures forever. This devastated him. He felt like, why would his girlfriend do this to him? He asked her about this contract and demanded that she change it to the original agreement. Tez refused. No matter how much he complained, she would not change the contract. She felt since she was the one that was essentially doing all the hard work to make things happen for him, then she should be highly compensated. Teddy felt stuck and duped. He felt the exact same way he felt when he was with Harold and how he was once again being exploited. He was furious. He began talking to some of his old friends from back in the day, some of the very ones that he used to get in trouble with. These guys still hadn't cleaned up their act of going the straight and narrow way, and most was still heavily involved in crime. They listened to Teddy about his grievances with Tez, and here's the part where many wonder how far was Teddy willing to go to have a successful career. On the night of April 14th, 1977, at around 11:30 p.m., TaazMayia, her preteen son, and Teddy's stage manager, Jojo Steins, were driving Tez home from a long day of work. Jojo pulled the Mercedes-Benz up to her driveway and went to the trunk to retrieve something for her. While Tez was walking towards her front door, someone who was hiding in the bushes popped out, held a gun up, and shot Tez in her chest, killing her instantly. She was 32 years old. The assailant quickly ran off, leaving Jojo and Tez's son stunned and traumatized. Jojo Steins would be haunted by that night all the way until his own death in 2013. After a police investigation, they said they believed that someone was just trying to scare her, but accidentally killed her, or someone wanted her dead. Her case has still been unsolved. The news of Tez's murder went around quickly. Teddy, who was conveniently out of town during her murder, was approached by his road manager, Henry Evans, who had informed him about her killing. Henry noticed that Teddy's reaction seemed abnormal. Instead of being surprised or even sad, Henry said that Teddy appeared relieved about the news, and not only relieved, but borderline happy. Other people began to notice Teddy's insensitive reaction to her passing as well, and they gave him the side eye. Teddy was out here living his life, partying and sleeping with multiple women and acting like someone who hadn't just lost a loved one. Rumors started to go out about Teddy possibly being involved in Tez's murder. They believed either he did it himself or that he hired the Black Mafia of Philadelphia to do it. Because Teddy had shared his grievances about Tez with all his criminal friends, they were very angry with her. Also because while she was helping to build his career, Tez was strict about Teddy's behavior and what he could or couldn't do, who he could or couldn't be around, and putting a limit to the amount of partying, drugs, booze, prostitutes, and hangers-ons. His underworld friends felt she was standing in the way of their fun and opportunities. Now that she was gone, they started to do all those things again. TaazMayia Lang's funeral was held on April 19, 1977, at the Second Macedonia Baptist Church. There were stretch limousines aligning the streets, shiny jewelry and fur coats adorning almost everyone inside. Letters of condolences from Barry White, Aretha Franklin, and Sammy Davis Jr. were read. Nancy Wilson and Teddy Pendergrass sang solos. And while Teddy sang, he was getting very dirty looks from the crowd. The people were cold to him, and whispers in the congregation of how Teddy definitely caused this. Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was performing the eulogy, was being obvious with his dirty stares directed at Teddy. Teddy did not appreciate how he was being treated, but the people let it be known they were onto him. 2 months after Tez was laid to rest, Teddy's self-titled debut album was released and became a huge success. All the hard work that Tez had put into him, she did not get to see her fruits. Teddy was having back-to-back hits and multiple platinum albums. He was beating out his peers such as Marvin Gaye and Barry White. Women from all over were falling in love with him. He was even able to sell out ladies-only shows where the women would throw their panties and themselves on the stage. Teddy was finally living his dream. He purchased a 34-room mansion, had several luxury cars, bought horses, had multiple endorsement deals, and his own clothing line. The world was his oyster, but soon he would start to make enemies during his meteoric rise. Teddy had started to become very arrogant. The fame and success had gotten to his head. He was being very nasty to people around him. He had beef with other celebrities such as the Isley Brothers and Lou Rawls. He was using drugs galore, and even worse, he started brazenly sleeping with other men's wives. One of his more famous mistresses was Marvin Gaye's wife, Jan Gaye. Fellow star Rick James is the one that told Teddy to chill with messing with other men's wives, but no one could tell Teddy anything. He was on cloud 9 and nothing was going to bring him down, or so he thought. Teddy had a great 5 to 6 year run with nothing but success and extreme indulgence. His arrogance had gotten him in trouble with the law multiple times, though. Teddy had a bad habit of taking his luxury cars and speeding. He'd get harassed by the police because, for one, he was a rich black man flaunting his wealth. So he did not have a good relationship with law enforcement at all, and their eyes were constantly on him. But this next life-changing event shows that other people's shady eyes were on Teddy as well. On March 18, 1982, Teddy had been mingling at the club that night. While there, he was approached by a woman who looked familiar to him. This woman's name was Tanika Watson, and she had to remind him that he'd tried to get with her a few years back. She thought he was a pimp, looking to recruit new girls at the time, and ran away from him. But now that he was the Teddy Pendergrass, she wanted to know if he was willing to give it another try with her. Teddy, who was entertaining another woman at the bar, rudely left her and went off with Tanika. The two got inside his green Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit. It was around 1:30 in the morning when Teddy was on Lincoln Drive, a very windy road, when he noticed that his brakes stopped working. He sideswiped the center divider, causing the car to careen into the oncoming lane and hit 2 trees. As the rolls jumped the curb, Teddy's head hit the roof of the car twice. The second impact was so vicious that it broke his neck, shattering his 5th and 6th vertebrae. Teddy and Tanika were trapped inside the wreckage for at least 45 minutes. When help came, Tanika was able to get extricated and walked away with minor injuries. But Teddy was not so lucky. He realized he could not move. Teddy was calling out to Tanika, begging her not to leave him, begging her not to let them get him. Tanika was confused and even scared because who was them and why would they be after him? Was this not just an accident? Was this something more? She wanted to get away from him and whoever the evil thems were. But that was the problem. The thems could literally have been anyone because Teddy had racked up so many enemies. Teddy was pulled from the wreckage and his fate was sealed. He was quadriplegic, and only a few days away from his 32nd birthday, he would never walk again. Coincidentally, he was the same age as Tez when she was murdered. Upon investigation, it was discovered that Teddy's brakes were deliberately tampered with. So, this appeared to be no accident at all. What was even more unsettling is that only the week before this crash, Teddy had wrecked his Maserati. He asked that the cops check his other cars back at home to see if they'd been tampered with as well. It was found out that they were. This was definitely intentional. Someone or something was out to get Teddy. Some believe this was payback for his perceived involvement in Tez's killing. That perhaps TaazMayya's family was getting revenge. Teddy believed it could be the cops who'd done this. He'd gotten into it with them and had been harassed by them for so long, he felt they were trying to harm him for his arrogance. After all, he was driving on a suspended license when this crash happened. Then the multitudes of men he'd pissed off due to stealing their wives' affections, any of them could have tried to get back at him. Or maybe it was karma from the universe trying to humble him for getting too big for his own good. Who knows? But either way, things were bad. Really bad. And while he was going through the depressing realization that he was paralyzed for life, the rumors started to come out about Teddy and his questionable sexuality. In the news, it came out that his date Tanika Watson was actually John Watson, a former man who transitioned. A few career-damaging rumors was that Teddy was gay and picked Tanika up, knowing that he was a trans woman as a prostitute. It was rumored that Tanika was performing mouth service to Teddy while he was driving, and this caused him to crash. This rumor wasn't true. Teddy ended up suing the Rolls-Royce company for creating a faulty car and ultimately won the lawsuit. Teddy Pendergrass, as the public knew him, was no more. The tall, sexy, masculine man that made women swoon was now immobile. He could no longer care for himself and was dependent on others to live, something he no longer wanted to do. He was so depressed that he asked his girlfriend to give him an overdose of sleeping pills since he couldn't do it himself. He no longer wanted to be alive. On top of that, the public had moved on. All the fans he'd accumulated were all now jamming with Marvin Gaye and his sexual healing. Teddy was quickly the thing of the past, but during his time in therapy, he met a therapist that helped him to still see the value of his life. Also, even though Teddy couldn't walk anymore, one thing he could still do was sing. He had not lost that special gift, and he was going to use it. He'd released 2 albums after his accident. None of them touched the success of his previous works. He'd made a triumphant return to the stage during a performance of Live Aid in 1985. He performed alongside Ashford and Simpson in front of 100,000 concert attendees and 1.5 billion TV viewers. He was greatly received, and he thanked the people for all their love and support. Then it seemed karma, or someone was coming back for revenge, because on July 3rd, 1986, Teddy had gotten into another severe car crash. Teddy was critically injured in his specially equipped van when he lost control and crashed it into a utility pole. He was in critical condition as he'd suffered a 4-inch gash in his liver and other internal bleeding. The nurse who was also inside suffered a broken arm. Had his van been tampered with like his other vehicles from before? Was someone in Tez's family after him? Or someone from Harold Melvin's Black Mafia crew? Was Teddy still a wanted man? He ultimately survived his injuries and began to live his life to the fullest. In 1987, Teddy married his backup dancer, Karen Still. Then, in 1988, he released his #1 R&B song, Joy, which was his biggest hit since returning to music. After that, Teddy kind of settled out of the spotlight. He released his memoirs in 1998, got a divorce from Karen in 2002, and remarried in 2008 to a woman named Joan Williams. June 5th of 2009, Teddy had undergone a surgery to remove his colon cancer. Although the surgery was successful, Teddy had developed respiratory problems. For 7 months, he'd been in and out of the hospital with these issues and trying to find out why or how to fix it. But there was no hope because after 7 months of this, on January 13th, 2010, Teddy finally passed away from respiratory failure. His wife was by his side. So lurkers, what do you think? Do you think Teddy has anything to do with the death of TaazMayia Lang? Do you think people were out to get him, hence all the car crashes? Let me know down below.